and those laws, including in war, have to be followed. But also, we have values and morals. And at the end of the day,
눈에 보이지 않는다고 과연 깨끗할까요? 우리가 잠든 사이 그릇이랑 수저 위로 지나가는 바퀴벌레들 한 마리가 보이면 100마리가 숨어 있어요. 눈에 보이지 않는 바퀴들, 이렇게 많은 바퀴들을 어떻게 하죠?
A couple times in this conversation, you've brought up Saudi Arabia, and that deal, the U.S. Nuclear deal or arrangement being made with Saudi Arabia. And I'm wondering, is it your feeling that this comes out of an appeasement, so to speak, but at the same time, then the president, the next day after it was revealed publicly, put a condition in place. So do you see this as a viable path for Saudi Arabia and the U.S. in this arrangement of nuclear enrichment, or is there something else going on here?
Well, there is no doubt, Fred, that the regional allies are sending messages to Washington that their economies have been badly hit. There is no Vision 2030 in Saudi Arabia, their big plan for economic growth, with the vision of missiles on the horizon. And so the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Qataris, the Omanis are frantically calling Washington and saying, you are going to owe us for these. We may not necessarily be seeing that in the public space, but the damage to their economies is so great. And the future prospects, even if we get to a ceasefire or a peace deal, this war has created instability. It's created concern in the Gulf. And that is coming with a considerable...
With what appears to be a pause in U.S. attacks against Iran, the U.S. military did not announce it was launching strikes on Friday. This is after pummeling Iran for 13 straight nights. And we're also not getting any reports of Iranian attacks on U.S. allies in Bahrain, Jordan, or Kuwait overnight. Now, all of this comes after President Trump met with top advisors and cabinet officials to discuss a potential escalation of the war. That's according to a source. The president says the U.S. is still actively negotiating with Iran after their ceasefire agreement crumbled earlier this month. But he also suggested U.S. forces could press on with their campaign and even expand it.
There's a military exit where we just keep going just the way we are, and we can even make it a heavier dose, and it's knocking out everything they have. Or there's a smarter strategy, and that's you make a deal. And they want to make a deal. I just don't think they're ready yet.
I want to bring in now Leila Gargazo. She is joining us live from London. So we're hearing from our reporters in the White House, Leila, that President Trump is weighing the possibility of a massive attack. I mean, what could that mean after nearly 2 weeks of punishing airstrikes?
Yeah, so it could mean a range of things. He's said over the last 2 weeks that he could hit civilian infrastructure like bridges or desalination plants. He's also toyed with the idea of hitting Mount Kolang, or as people call it, Pickaxe Mountain, which is part of the Natanz facility. So there could be quite a lot of different options here. The U.S. generally over the last 2 weeks has been working to degrade Iran's military capability and loosen its control over the Strait of Hormuz. So much of those strikes that we've seen in these 14 days have really been in that stretch along the southern area of Iran, the defensive arch. He could widen that out, go back to hitting places like Tehran and really focusing again on the capital. So there's a lot to work with, I guess, in terms of strike targets. That being said, he's also had conflicting statements where he said that, they could be talking, the Iranians are talking, he's open to the idea of diplomatic negotiations. So it's unclear what next steps he's going to take. Now, a lot of the analysts and experts that I've been speaking to over the last 2 weeks have said that if the U.S. is looking to have Iran capitulate via more airstrikes and an expanded campaign, that's very unlikely to happen. And the Iranians themselves have said that. They've said that if the U.S. escalates, they're going to escalate in kind. They're not going to sit and negotiate, and they're not going to move those red lines around things like their nuclear program, which is what President Trump says he wants curbed. So it's unclear what a actual expansion of the mission for the U.S. is going to really do. It's not going to necessarily bring Iran back to the table. And one of the things to remember here is that Iran has a very high pain threshold when it comes to these strikes and even things like an economic blockade. So they can go quite a long time with this kind of conflict before it really starts changing their behavior. And it's unclear if the U.S. is going to want to commit to a much broader war and campaign, Salma.
Well, so far this morning, Iranian media has not reported any strikes inside the country as the U.S. conflict with Iran continues. Now, CENTCOM also did not report any military action yesterday. That's after the U.S. pounded Iran with strikes for nearly 2 weeks straight. President Trump did say he thinks Iran is getting more serious in talks and try to end the war. Let's discuss with Maryland Congresswoman Sarah Elfreth. Congresswoman, thank you for being with me. These, first night of breaks after 13 consecutive nights of attacks. The president is reportedly considering an escalation in strikes. What do you make of these strikes? And do you think they are persuasive? The president seems to think so.
Oh, well, the president claims to be the best deal maker that I think ever was in the White House or in the world. And we're seeing that that's just not true. We're 150 days into this conflict. We've lost 19 service members. Another 400 have been injured. Secretary Hegseth just told the Congress that he estimates this this war has cost $37 billion in taxpayer money, and there's still no end in sight. The president seems to be warmongering via tweet instead of having a thoughtful strategy here. I don't think he had a goal to begin with when he got us into this war, and he certainly doesn't have any way to get us out of it right now. It's I'm watching it just like you are every single day. There is a new escalation, a new twist to this war. And frankly, the American people are fed up.
Well, the president says that the Iranians are getting more serious about talks. Let me play specifically what the president said from the Oval.
He made a decision about the major strikes that you were referring to? Okay. Should we expect to see major strikes?
Look, we're talking to them right now. I think they're getting more and more serious as the days go by, for maybe the obvious reason. But we are talking to them right now. Look, there are two ways. I consider that the smarter way, but the other is probably the easier way, doing what we're doing. And we can take that to a much higher level if we want to. We're prepared to do that, as you know. We're locked and loaded.
Locked and loaded, and they're getting more serious. What do you believe is the viability of talks at this point? I mean, there was the ceasefire, the memorandum of understanding that was violated or it kind of fell apart within days. What about now?
Honestly, I don't think the president knows how to get out of this, and he's just talking out of both sides of his mouth. To your point, he claimed we had a ceasefire. He was the one who violated it. There is no strategy. There is no plan. I didn't feel like there was a strategy to begin with when we got into this war. We don't know where we are in the process of the war. Congress and my committee, the Armed Services Committee, has not been given an exit strategy. Again, we just see, like you do every single day in the news, more service members in harm's way, more taxpayer money being spent with no end in sight, and just a continued escalation of this conflict for the entire region. And it's not just the U.S. versus Iran at this point. You're seeing Iran bombing other folks in the region. And the escalation of this should be scary to every single American watching it at home, just like we are. Now, the Congress has passed, you probably saw, 2 war powers resolutions. We had 4 Republicans join us, recognizing that we need to reassert our constitutional authority when it comes to declaring war, providing a check on the president. He seems to not care or think that they are at all relevant to his actions here, but the American people are pretty loud and clear that this needs to end. And I'm not sure who he is listening to, certainly not the people, Congress, or even his advisors.
The president, after Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said that Russia and China are enabling Iran, said that he doesn't believe that Xi and Putin are arming Iran. Here's what he said.
I will tell you that President Xi said he will not partake, and President Putin said the same thing. I think, I trust them. I don't think they'd want to have me disappointed.
He doesn't think they want to have him disappointed. What do you think about the degree to which, and there may be a little daylight between what we heard from Hegseth and what the president said intentionally, but how China and Russia are involved with Iran in this war?
Israeli forces used tear gas and arrested dozens of Palestinians. This was in the occupied West Bank on Saturday. This is video from the village of Tel, where just a day earlier, clashes left 4 Palestinians and 2 Israeli soldiers dead. On the orders of the Prime Minister, the Israeli military began preparing for a large-scale operation, canceling leave and getting ready to send in reinforcements. A paramedic described how people in the village are feeling.
People here are scared of what happened yesterday, noting that around 8 houses were set on fire in the village, and vehicles as well. So people started taking precautions and buying fire extinguishers and first aid kits to be able to tend to the incidents until the needed services and paramedics arrive.
But some Israelis are coming together to condemn settler assaults on Palestinians in the West Bank. Here's a look at Tel Aviv on Saturday, filled with people chanting and carrying eye-catching signs. The deadly incident Friday in the West Bank came amid a marked escalation in settler attacks in the territory. The UN has called for urgent action to stop the violence. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is set to visit the U.S. this week. He's going to meet with President Trump at the White House on Tuesday. While he's in the U.S., Mr. Netanyahu is also expected to attend the funeral for the late Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. This is the Prime Minister's 7th visit to the U.S. to meet with the president and comes, of course, at President Trump's invitation. Joining me now from Jerusalem is Yaakov Katz. He is the co-founder of the Middle East America Dialogue, an author and a senior columnist at the Jerusalem Post. Thank you so much for joining us, first of all, Yaakov. I want to talk, of course, about this visit that will take place on Tuesday. And we know Iran's going to be at the top of the agenda. We know as well that Prime Minister Netanyahu has been opposed to negotiations. So let's get into the details here. What plans, ideas, alternatives is he going to pitch to President Trump on the Tehran front? How is he going to try to shape Washington's next move here?
Well, I think that in Israel, there's a feeling of, Salma, of like a bad taste, the way that the war has been going and the way it ended with that MOU in the middle of June that didn't really pan out because, as we've seen, except for the last 2 days, almost 2 weeks of every single day airstrikes by the Americans against Iran, which is refusing to capitulate and basically give in to what Trump's basic demands have been to give up the nuclear program, to open the Strait of Hormuz, and to stop the continued buildup of their military capabilities. Israel would like to see more strikes, more extensive, to include more targets. And I think that that's what Netanyahu was coming to Washington, is to discuss with Trump, okay, what are these next steps going to be? How do we make sure that a bad deal is potentially not reached? But at the same time, Salma, we have to keep in mind, Netanyahu is very sensitive and aware of the fact that there is a growing voice or sounds within Washington, especially within the Republican Party, that it was him and it was Israel that dragged the United States and Donald Trump specifically into this war. He doesn't want to be seen as doing that again. So he's going to have to balance both of these interests very carefully. On the one hand, try to get out of Trump what he can on Iran. On the other hand, not be seen as, again, the guy who's the warmonger who's dragging America into what has already been called a forever war.
So let's delve into that further, because this is the crux of the issue here, right? Is this up and down relationship between Netanyahu and Trump over the last few months. Give me a current state of play, if you will, of their relationship. Does he really have President Trump's ear at this moment, or is he going to be unheard, as you said, because of these criticisms in Washington?
Well, I mean, that's a real good question, because what we've looked and we've seen over the last few weeks is that there is a strain in the relationship. It's no secret. I mean, just listen to Vice President J.D. Vance's comments in that podcast interview with Joe Rogan, things that he said about a campaign, this alleged campaign that the Israeli government has launched in America against him specifically and on the administration to pressure them to continue the war. We've seen how President Trump has met with President Erdogan of Turkey, a known critic and very hostile relations between Netanyahu and Erdogan. He's met with the Iraqi prime minister. He's met with the Lebanese president. Netanyahu has been trying to get a meeting with Trump for several weeks and hasn't succeeded. Now he's been able to connect that with the funeral of the late Senator Lindsey Graham that's supposed to also take place on Tuesday. So he's able to combine between the two. But Israel has been, and you can see this, it's quite apparent, has been pushed aside from the point in the beginning few weeks of the war. Joint planning, joint deliberations, joint strategy. Now it's as if Israel's not even in the room. So Netanyahu wants to try to get back in that room, not only, but also back at a chair at the table in making those decisions. Will Trump give him that? I mean, it will depend on what mood the president's in, on what the atmosphere is like, and basically also what Israel's bringing on its own and what it can bring as an advantage to the next steps on Iran.
So let's talk about that because, like you said, Netanyahu wants to be back in that room. These men, both Netanyahu and Trump, are all about the art of the deal. What concessions or sweeteners maybe be offered? Because we know that President Trump is losing patience on Gaza. He's losing patience on Lebanon. He's losing patience on Iran. Is there a deal here that Prime Minister Netanyahu could offer or a concession to ease that?
Well, I mean, he's also probably, I'm guessing that President Trump is also watching what's happening in the West Bank, as you reported just a few minutes ago, and seeing also how there's increasing violence there. And he's not going to be happy with that situation either. So there's a lot of multiple fronts that Israel continues to find itself in without really a resolution on any of them. I mean, in Lebanon, it's probably the most optimistic. We have this pilot program that the Israeli Defense Forces are moving out of southern Lebanese villages, and the LAF, the Lebanese Armed Forces, is moving in and to fill the void and hopefully prevent Hezbollah from returning. But you're right, Gaza's stuck. West Bank, there's no political horizon. And Iran, it doesn't seem like anything's moving forward. I think that what Trump might want out of Netanyahu, unless they're about to go again towards a joint offensive against the Iranians, is sit tight, let me reach a political resolution, and don't ruin it for me. There were those voices that we heard in the immediate aftermath of the MOU in June that because of the continued violence between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon, which I think was completely legitimate on Israel's part, it has to defend itself, but still perception was that whenever Israel defended itself in the north and attacked in Lebanon, the Iranians used that as an excuse not to agree to an agreement with the Americans. So Trump might want Netanyahu, he'll say, Bibi, just sit tight, let me get this agreement, don't get in the way. Can Netanyahu be seen as doing that with the elections on the horizon? Let's remember, Salma, Israel has its own elections, October 27th. Netanyahu needs to be seen as standing firm, standing tough, standing up to whatever some other foreign leader tells him to do. He can't give in that easily.
This morning on the U.S. war in Iran. It involves a key meeting that President Trump had on Friday. Now, a source and U.S. official tell CNN that Vice President J.D. Vance and Joint Chiefs of Staff General Dan Kane came to warn President Trump at a meeting about escalating the war. The sources say that Kane told Trump his military options, but he also expressed concerns about further depleting the U.S. munitions stockpile and other possible negative consequences. Now, it's unclear if those reasons prompted the U.S. to pause what had been nearly 2 consecutive weeks of strikes on Iran. The U.S. military has continued its naval blockade, though, of Iranian ports. U.S. Central Command posted on social media yesterday that it boarded a tanker in the Arabian Sea that violated that blockade. Let's go now to CNN international diplomatic editor Nick Robertson. What is the Trump administration saying about the concerns of escalation ahead of this meeting with Netanyahu on Tuesday?
Yeah, the concern is, this is something that analysts CNN have spoken to as well, have said the defensive missile systems like the THAAD, the Patriot, a lot of them were used up defending against all those incoming Iranian missiles in the earlier part of the war a few months ago. So that's a concern. A significant number of Tomahawks, also an land attack weapon, also used up. So if you commit more weapon systems to another round of fighting, then you reduce your options for another war or another conflict in another theater around the world. That was, as from what we understand, was the concern raised. What it has allowed, this pause, whatever the reason, and diplomats I'm talking to are sort of referring to this as an unannounced ceasefire, if you will, that's now gone through 2 nights. It's given an opportunity for an Omani delegation to go to Tehran. They went Friday, stayed into Saturday, left late Saturday to have conversations. The Iranian foreign minister saying that there was progress in those talks, that they focused on the Strait of Hormuz. But there's absolutely no indication here whatsoever that the Iranians have given ground on their core point on the Strait of Hormuz, which is they want to have control over it and be able to make money out of it in the future. The Iranians also have spoken about how they've caused a number of vessels, 6 vessels, to go to anchor and not transit the Strait of Hormuz. I think when you step back just a tiny little bit and look at the messaging from both the US side and the Iranian side, both operating their blockades, but not signaling it through maximalist shooting of ships, but sort of a one tempo down, if you will, the boarding and inspection and the ships being put at anchor. Can this pause for diplomacy hold? And as discussed here, the cost of an escalation, there are implications with that, and that was what was explained to the president.